guys, welcome back to my channel, Simone here. So today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 standalones. Standalones, if you don't know, which you probably do, but if you don't know, they are books which are on their own without sequels or spin-offs, I guess. They are books that stand by themselves as a complete story. And sometimes I really like reading standalones. Trilogies and series can be great, but sometimes it's good to just have a book that you don't have to continue reading other books in the series to know the answers. It's good to have it all in one book. A lot of thrillers tend to be standalones, but strangely I don't have too many of those on my list. Just looking at my list now because it's right next to me. And as you all know, I don't keep books once I've read them, so I actually only own one of these 10 books, and it's the first one, so I will jump right onto that now. So the first one I have is probably my favourite classic ever, and it is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Now, I have read this book, like you can tell from the cover. Basically, I read this at school and I bought this copy then. So if I show you, oh, now I can't find any. There we go. Like, it's all highlighted, and now I cringe because I would never write in a book now, but then it was kind of like expected of us. So throughout this book it has a lot of my like highlightings and little bits written in it, but I kind of like having this copy for that reason, because it's nice to kind of look at it and be like, I remember when I wrote that and I remember doing that. So, but yeah, I really love this. It's literally my favourite. I've probably read this a good like 10 times, I reckon, and I reckon I'll read it again fairly like regularly as well. This follows a young girl named Jane Eyre who is orphaned, and she moves in with her uncle who she really loves, and then he dies, so she's living with her aunt and her cousins who are basically horrible to her, and there is no love lost between them. Then she goes to the school, and the school is evil to her too. Like, she just doesn't have very much luck. And then she goes to be a governess at She goes to be a governess at Mr. Rochester's house, and then things happen from there. Now, this is such a beautiful book. I love it so much. Like, honestly, if I could only read one book for the rest of my life, I would probably read this one. I mean, I know that that's kind of a big thing, but it's so good. Like, Charlotte Bronte, I don't think I've read anything else by her, but this is amazing, and it's literally, oh, I just can't even talk about it because I love it so much. It's one of those books. Yeah, I can't really say too much else about this. I would say that if you haven't read this, read it, because it's great. The second on my list is The Help by Catherine Stockett. I talked about this book a lot on my channel. I actually mentioned it in my historical fiction reads and recommends video that I filmed and went up recently, and I shall link that video below if you haven't seen it already. But this basically follows Skeeter, who is a journalist, and she is living in the 1950s where black people are essentially the help for white people, so they bring up their children and they cook and clean for them, but they are still deemed as second-class citizens. So Skeeter wants to talk to the help of her sort of friends to kind of get their insight into what they have to go through and the things that they have to go like put up with, and obviously she doesn't want her friends to know about this because then she'd be in trouble basically. And it's really interesting. I feel like this has quite a lot of parallels with To Kill a Mockingbird, which I nearly put on this list, and then I remembered that it has a sequel now which I haven't read yet. Yeah, there's a lot of because it's set around the same sort of time as that, and I really love this. It's interesting to see how society reacts to certain things at certain times of life. So, you know, in the 1950s, if you were sort of sympathetic towards the help or the black people in your town, then you were really frowned upon, which I really find a difficult thing to think about now, because obviously that's not something that I've ever, like, I would never think about that, because like at this time of life, like, we don't discriminate. Well, some people do, but I would never ever think about discriminating at somebody for this colour of their skin. So I really struggled to kind of imagine it as a real thing, but then obviously you see these things and it was real, and it was and it's something that we have to talk about. So yeah, I really liked this book, and I think that again it's one that's quite important to read. I feel like it's a good historical book, and yeah, I would definitely recommend. The next one is a thriller, and it's The Girl on the Train by, oh god, who's it by? Paula Hawkins. Paula Hawkins also has a new book out called Into the Water, which I haven't read yet, but I've heard really good things about. But most people have heard of The Girl on the Train. It also has a really great film adaptation, which I really loved. The Girl on the Train basically follows a woman named Rachel, who every day she goes to work on the same train, and one of the places that the train stops on the track is outside the house of this couple who she sees on the balcony pretty much every day. And so she starts to give them a name and give them jobs and give them a personality in her head of what she thinks they would be like if she met them, and she imagines them to have this perfect life. And then one day she sees something that massively shocks her, and then all of a sudden she's involved in this missing persons thing, and it's just great. Again, this is a thriller, so it's really kind of intricate, and there's lots of things happening, and there's a big twist, obviously, like there always is at the end of thrillers. I didn't get this in the film. No, I got this in the film, I didn't get it in the book, that's what I'm trying to say. The book really threw me, like I read it first and I didn't know what was going to happen, so yeah, I really loved this. And my only thing is, I don't think this is a spoiler, but the narrator's not very reliable, and sometimes I struggle with unreliable narrators, but I think this one kind of works itself out, and it actually works out and comes together in the end. But I would say if you don't like that sort of thing, then probably steer clear, but other than that I would definitely say it's one to check out. Number 4 is one that I've not heard a lot of people talk about, especially recently, and this is one of those kind of beloved authors where everything is mentioned about the other books that she's written, but not about this one specifically. And this is The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. Now, Maggie Stiefvater wrote The Raven Cycle, and everybody always talks about it like it's a really big book series, which I have the first book of and haven't read it yet, but I do plan on reading it very, very soon. But basically, this follows, on The Scorpio Races, follows a young girl who enters into this really dangerous water horse like riding competition, and basically these horses are essentially really dangerous, and they only come out of the sea at certain times of the year, and basically they are captured and then trained to ride, and like I say, they're dangerous, they sort of bite each other, and there's lots of things that happen. But basically it's normally males who enter into this race, but she's decided to enter the race because her older brother is trying to leave the island that they live on. He wants to move elsewhere, and as they have her and her younger brother are both orphaned, she obviously doesn't want her brother to leave. So in order for him not to leave, she's trying to enter into this so that he kind of has to stick around. And this is such a great book. It has a really good romance in it too, which I really enjoyed. It's not a book I would have normally picked up, but because I'd heard such good things about Maggie Stiefvater, I saw this book in the library and I was like, I'm going to pick this up and see what I think. And I'm so glad I did, because I did really enjoy it. It has a lot of darkness to this book, which I think is something which, again, I've not read a lot of that sort of thing in YA, but I really loved this. It had the fantastical elements, but it felt like it was really rooted in real life, which I like. I kind of like that realistic sort of fantastical side of things, because it was really interesting. And yeah, I would definitely recommend giving this a go if you like that sort of thing. I think it is probably one of those books that not everybody's going to love, but I did love it, so yeah. Then I have a book that I read recently, so I will find the wrap up when I talked about it, so I can link it below for you, and also up here. Which side is the card on? Like this side? That side? I don't know, I'll link it on a card anyway. And it is Amy and Roger's Epic Detour by Morgan Matson. Now, I'd heard great things about Morgan Matson's writing, but I'd never actually read one of her books, and then I saw this in the library and decided to give it a go because I'd heard such great things, and I do love books about road trips, and this was fantastic. This is about Amy, whose dad died in a car accident, and then after this her mum decides to move across the state. They live in America, so she wants to move it to a different state basically, and so she wants Amy to drive the car, or their car, to this place. And Amy, since her father's accident, has not wanted to drive because, you know, he died in a car accident, so it's kind of explanatory. And so obviously she's kind of struggling with this. So one of her mum's family friends, Roger, is volunteered basically by his mum to drive Amy, because he's going to visit his dad near where she's going. And so they then decide that although her mum has sort of set out these points that she wants them to go to and these places she wants them to stay, they decide to go on a bit of a detour and sort of see the countryside that they want to see. And it's so good. I said in that wrap up that this is one of those books that is really emotional, because I think that Morgan Matson must have had real life experience of this, but when Amy talks about losing her dad, it is one of the most emotional things I've read in a book. That wasn't like a memoir. This is fiction. So I didn't expect it to be quite so heart-wrenching, but it really got me. It wasn't like she was it was almost like she didn't want sympathy. She didn't want that kind of sadness, but it kind of emanated from her, which I found really interesting, because that's how good Morgan Matson's character building was, that it made you feel for her even though she kind of didn't want you to, or at least that's kind of what I got from it. So it was really brilliant. The road trip was great, they saw some amazing things, and I loved the romance, and yeah, I really liked this, so yeah, give it a go. Then we have a book that I feel like definitely polarizes opinions. I really loved it, but I know a lot of people have some real issues with it. And this is All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. Now, I heard about this book on the, when it was in Zoe's, or from Zoella, her book club picks, which I'll link below if I can find it. And basically, this is a book about suicide. And maybe that's why people have such differing opinions, because it's very much on the spectrum. But I found this to be a really true to life story, because I've gone through some of these things myself, not suicide, but kind of the thoughts and the other things that go with it. This basically follows a boy and a girl, both of which first meet each other on the bell tower at their school, where they're both about to commit suicide, and then they talk each other out of it, and then then it's their relationship from then on, from that moment. And I know a lot of people have problems with the reality of this. They think that there's an issue with the consent between the two when they have sexual relations, and I do understand that, and I do obviously respect that people have a certain opinion about those. I can understand where the book was coming from, so I don't have a massive issue with that. I do understand that it probably could have been written in a slightly different way, but to me it was real to life. It maybe wasn't healthy, but it is how I sort of think that it happens in real life. Like, it's not something I think that's just been made up by the author. I think Jennifer Niven has great writing skills. I think her portrayal of this sort of story was really brilliantly done, and I think quite sensitive personally, but again, this is all very objective. I just loved this book. It really helped me. It made me cry a lot, but then I feel like a book about mental health generally is either going to make you cry a lot or you're not going to care at all. And for me, it was definitely that I was crying while I was reading it, and I don't generally cry at books, so that really tells me something. I loved this, and I definitely want to pick up her next book. I believe it's called Holding Up the Universe, so I want to check that out quite soon. Number 7 on my list is a book that I didn't love the writing style of, but I really loved the message and the kind of storyline, and that is I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. Now, if you've heard other people talk about this book, you'll know that it's quite a flowery writing style, which I didn't love. I'm not really into that kind of writing. However, the storyline of this is amazing. It follows Jude and Noah, twins who have had a really great relationship for a really long time, and then all of a sudden something happens and then they're really barely speaking. And there's a lot about art school in this, which is interesting because I'm not an artistic person in the slightest. Like, I have generally no artistic tendencies at all. I'm more of a writing person than I am a drawing and art style. I admire people who are completely, because it's such a great creative thing to be able to do, but I just have no understanding or skill in the matter, to be honest with you, so yeah. But basically this is set, it's interestingly written because it's written from two different perspectives. So it's written from, I believe Noah writes the, who writes which? One, I can't remember which one's which, but one of them is the perspective of them when they were talking, and one of them is the perspective of like 3 years later when they're not talking anymore. And it's kind of the relationship between them in two different ways, and kind of the thing that happened to massively kind of make them go their own way. And it really interests me to sort of find out, like, if you're that close with someone, how something can massively tear you apart. This was really great. This had quite a lot of good, like, I felt like good psychology to it, which really interested me. And yeah, I really loved this book. Again, the writing wasn't really for me, but then I feel like I'm just not a person who really enjoys that kind of flowery writing. However, I understand it has a lot of merit, and I did love the storyline, so I would recommend. The next one I have is a book that I read last year and I really loved it, and it actually set off my interest in reading this author, and this is Eleanor Park by Rainbow Rowell. Now this follows the first love, and I find this to be really interesting. This is about Eleanor Park, strangely enough. Eleanor is a girl who's a bit of a misfit. She's sort of she has a very distinctive dress sense, and the people at her school, like the other students, think she's a little bit weird, and she's got this big red hair, and you know, she's a little bit eccentric perhaps. And then you have Park, who is he's sort of in with the popular kids, but he's kind of the like quiet one who doesn't really talk to them too much, but he kind of gets on with them. And on their first day back to school after the summer, Park is sitting on a chair, and Eleanor she's starting new to school, and she gets on the bus, and the only place, like, nobody will let her sit down basically until Park lets her sit next to him, and then that's where their relationship starts. It's a really sweet book. I really loved this. I think Rainbow Rowell's writing is really, really lovely, and it was interesting to see a kind of relationship which is different, because I feel like when you think about first love, we often think that it's not going to last, and this book kind of made it feel like it didn't matter if it lasted or not. It wasn't about whether it was lasting, it was about that moment and being in that moment and that situation, and I loved this. I think Eleanor is one of my favourite characters. I absolutely adored her, and Park just suited her so well, and their relationship was amazing, and I loved it. So yeah, this is definitely 2 big thumbs up from me. Next I have, this is the penultimate one, and this is a book that I also read relatively recently. I can't remember if it was the same month as the other one I mentioned, but if not, I'll link this one below as well. And that is Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. Now, I loved Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn and really didn't like Sharp Objects, so you know, I kind of feel like her books are hit or miss for me, but Dark Places was definitely a massive hit. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was fantastically written. The storyline was really, really interesting and intriguing. Like, I did not see any of it coming. So Dark Places is a thriller about a girl who is now 25 years old, and when she was about 12 or so, something happened where basically her entire family was murdered. Her sister and her 2 sisters and her mother, I believe, and her older brother was arrested for it, and she was at his trial, and she basically testified against him to say that it was him. Anyway, this is like 15 years later, and basically she's met up with this group of people who basically believe that her brother is innocent, and she is now trying to figure out if what she thought she heard was actually what she heard, and whether or not he is actually innocent like they think he is. This was such a fun reading experience because it was kind of lots of things happening and lots of little clues that you kind of had to put together, and I love that about thrillers. Again, I love Gillian Flynn. I love how she writes like unlikable female characters, but you kind of still root for them anyway, and they are really interesting. So the main character in this, I can't remember her name. I have no idea. But yeah, I thought she was great, and but even though she was unlikable, which is really strange. But yeah, brilliant book, and definitely I will read more of Gillian Flynn's book as she brings it out, because it's either hit or miss for me, and I've had 2 hits and 1 miss, so I feel like the percentage is quite good. And then the last book is another one that's quite controversial, and I got this from the library maybe a year ago now, I can't quite remember. I think it might have been the beginning of the year actually. This is Soundless by Rochelle Mead. Now, I know a lot of people have a problem with the disability representation in this, about the aspect of deafness. Now, I am deaf in one ear, so I don't obviously have a lot, like I can't say much really for that side of things. However, I do have some connection to the deaf community, I suppose. So I personally did not think that this was badly represented, and you know, I don't know how much like authority I have in that, because like I say, I'm only half deaf, but I am half deaf, and so I feel like I'm gonna say it anyway. So this basically follows a village which is on top of a hill, cliff, mountain, whatever you want to call it, and they have no access to get from the mountain down to the valley floor, so they can't get food, they can't get supplies. So basically what they do is they trade diamonds, I think it is, and they put them down the mountain, and then the people at the bottom of the mountain send them food and supplies up. And then one day the supplies stop coming, and obviously they're all a bit hungry. And then basically the thing about this village is that everybody is deaf. Everybody in the village is deaf. And then suddenly people start going blind as well. But the main character suddenly gets her hearing back, and so she has to try and use this to her advantage in helping her village not like die out, because clearly they have no way of like surviving at this point. And I really loved this. I thought it was really interesting. It's really short. Like I thought it would be like, I don't know, when people talked about it and kind of held it up, I saw it and thought, wow, it must, like, I didn't think like specifically how long I thought it was, but I thought it was like 300 and something pages, and actually it's like 200. I don't even know if it's 200 pages long, but it's really short, and so I got through it really quickly. But I loved it, and I know some people didn't, and I kind of struggle with that because I thought it was great. But that's just me, that's an opinion. So yeah, that was my 10th pick. So that was my top 10 standalones. I hope you liked this video. Let me know in the comments below what yours are, because I'd love to get some recommendations, and give this video a like if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I shall see you in my next one. Bye guys.